Okay, so you want to own a Viking trading post. You're picturing long ships nosed up on a gravel beach at dawn, sails still wet, men with beards to their belts hauling furs and amber off the deck, while somewhere behind them, a whole town smells of tar, smoke, and roasting meat. You picture the raiding, the axes, the gold. That's the story everyone tells. Now, here's a real object dug out of the ground on the Baltic island of Gotland in 1999. A farmer's field, a metal detector, and then the largest Viking silver hoard ever found. Roughly 67 kilograms of silver, more than 14,000 coins. And almost none of those coins were made anywhere near a Viking. They were struck in the mints of Baghdad, of Central Asia, of cities the person who buried them would never see and could probably not have pointed to on a map, if he had owned a map, which he did not. That is the part the sagas leave out. The real Viking fortune did not arrive on the point of a sword. It arrived on a set of scales, and the place where a chopped up Arab coin turned into a Norwegian fur and a captured human being turned into a Frankish sword was the trading post, not the battlefield, the market. So let's build one. Let's stand behind the counter, weigh the silver ourselves, and follow the money from a reindeer pelt in the Arctic all the way to a mint in the deserts of the Caliphate. And let's find out the thing nobody who romanticizes the Vikings ever asks. Could you actually get rich owning the market? And if so, who did? And who ended up buried under his own unsold stock? Start with the first hard truth because it breaks the fantasy immediately. You cannot own a Viking trading post, not the way you're imagining it. The market itself was not a thing a merchant could buy. It belonged in almost every case to a king or a great chieftain. Places like Hedeby at the base of Denmark, Birka on its island in a Swedish lake, Kaupang on a fjord in Norway, Ribe on the North Sea coast, Trousseau over on the Baltic, and Staraya Ladoga away east on a Russian river. These were not private businesses. They were licensed ground. The king guaranteed one thing there, and it was the only thing that made the whole place possible. Peace. Peace in the market. A rule that inside these fences, you did not draw a blade on a man you were haggling with, no matter what your families had done to each other last summer. That guaranteed peace is the product the king is selling you, and he is not selling it for free. What you can buy, or more often rent, is a plot. And we know exactly what those plots look like because archaeologists have dug them up at Hedeby and at Viking Dublin and elsewhere. Long, narrow strips of ground fenced with woven wattle, one edge on the waterfront or the main track, running back from it like the teeth of a comb. A house at the front where you lived and traded. Workshops behind. A jetty out into the harbor if you were lucky and well placed. That strip of fenced mud with the right to trade on it under the king's peace is the actual asset. Everything else, the ships, the goods, the reputation, you carry in and out. So write down Rule 1, because it runs under everything that follows. A Viking trading post was not a place you owned. It was a place where a king rented you safety, and safety was the rarest commodity in the whole northern world. Now, how do we know any of this? Because the honest answer to what did this business look like is not the movies. It's three witnesses, and they could not have been more different from one another. The first is a Norwegian chieftain named Othere, Ottar in the old tongue, who around the year 890 turned up at the court of King Alfred of England and simply described his life to the king's scribes. He told them how far north he lived, further north than any other Norseman he knew. He told them he was a wealthy man, and then he told them what his wealth actually was. Reindeer, including 6 trained decoy animals worth a small fortune, and the tribute he collected from the Sami people further north, furs, feathers, whalebone, and rope made from walrus and seal hide. He described hunting walrus for the ivory in their tusks, and he described sailing south to a trading place called Sirenge's Heel, which was Kaupang, and onto a place called At the Heaths, which was Hedeby, a rich man describing the fur and ivory trade from the inside, written down by an English king's clerk. It's one of the most valuable economic documents from the entire Viking Age, and it exists because one wealthy northerner liked to talk. The second witness is an Arab. In the year 921 into 922, a diplomat named Ibn Fadlan traveled north from Baghdad on an embassy and on the banks of the Volga met the Rus, Norse traders working the eastern rivers. He wrote down what he saw with the slightly appalled precision of a sophisticated city man watching people he found both impressive and filthy. He described their size, their tattoos, their weapons, their silver. He described them trading enslaved women. And he described, in detail, that still makes historians wince, the cremation of a dead chieftain in his ship. When you read Ibn Fadlan, you are reading an outsider who owed these people nothing, describing the human machinery of the trade without any of the northern romance. The third witness is a monk. A Frankish churchman named Ribe wrote the life of a missionary called Ansgar, who traveled to Birka in the 830s to preach. And buried inside all the miracles and conversions is a working portrait of a trading town. Merchants, an assembly where free men voted on whether to even let the missionary stay, a royal official keeping order, and the constant background awareness that this was a place where wealth moved and therefore a place where a lot could go wrong. A chieftain, a diplomat, a monk, three men who never met, describing the same machine from three sides. That's your instruction manual. Now let's stock the shelves. What actually moved through a place like Hedeby? Start with what the North had that the South wanted, because that is the whole engine. Furs, first and above almost everything. Squirrel by the tens of thousands, plus marten, fox, beaver, otter, and at the top of the range, the deep dark furs a wealthy man in Francia or the Caliphate would pay silver to wear. Walrus ivory, which was the North's answer to elephant tusk, and carved into everything from chess pieces to bishop's croziers. Walrus hide rope, absurdly strong, the kind of thing you rig a ship with. Amber scooped off the Baltic shore, warm and golden and light enough to carry a fortune of it in a sack. Whetstones cut from a specific gray schist in the Norwegian mountains and shipped so widely you can trace the quarry by finding the stones in graves hundreds of miles away. Soapstone bowls, iron blooms, reindeer antler worked into the combs that every self-respecting Viking apparently could not live without. Honey, wax, dried fish, down. And then the commodity that the tourist brochure and the theme park both quietly skip, the one that was central to the entire economy and impossible to honestly leave out: people. The Viking slave trade was not a footnote, it was a pillar. Raids on Ireland, on Britain, on the Slavic lands to the east produced captives, and those captives were walked, shipped, and sold through exactly these trading posts. Dublin became one of the great slave markets of the Western world. Hedeby handled them too. The trade ran so heavily on captured Slavs that it left a scar in language itself. The word slave in medieval Latin and the tongues that grew out of it comes from the word for Slav. Ibn Fadlan's account of the Rus is, among other things, an account of men who had captive women to sell. This is the grim floor beneath the amber and the fur. A large share of the silver in that Gotland hoard was, at some point in its journey, the price of a human life. An honest look at the business does not get to look away from that. Now run the arrows the other way, because a market only works if goods flow in both directions. Into the north came silver, above all. Silk, real Chinese and Byzantine silk, threads of which have been found in graves at Birka and in the great Oseberg ship burial. Fine glassware and beads from the Rhineland. Wine. Superb Frankish sword blades, the best in Europe, stamped with makers' names. Kernstones of hard volcanic rock for grinding grain. Pottery, spices, salt. The North sold raw wealth pulled out of forest and sea and human misery, and it bought back the finished, the refined, and the exotic. The trading post was the hinge, which brings us to the money, and the money is where the Vikings did something genuinely strange and genuinely clever. For most of the Viking Age, across most of Scandinavia, there were no reliable native coins to speak of. So how do you run one of the busiest commercial networks in early medieval Europe without a currency? You use silver, but you don't count it. You weigh it. This is what historians call a bullion economy, and once you understand it, half the archaeology suddenly makes sense. A merchant did not care whose face was on a coin or what king had minted it. He cared about one thing: how much did this weigh, and was it real silver all the way through? So coins got chopped, arm rings got chopped, ingots got chopped, all of it into what we now call hack silver, literally hacked up silver, and paid out by weight on a scale. That means the single most important tool in the whole trade was not the axe. It was the balance. Small, foldable, portable bronze scales that a trader carried in a little case, along with a set of standardized weights. Neat little cubo-octahedral and barrel-shaped weights that turn up in graves and settlements right across the Viking world, and turn up looking suspiciously similar to each other over enormous distances, which tells you the system had spread and settled into something people trusted. And because a bullion economy lives or dies on trust in the metal, traders developed a habit you can see with your naked eye on the coins themselves. They nicked them. They pecked at the surface with a knife point to check that a shiny Durham wasn't just a base metal core with a thin silver skin. Go look at Viking Age Arab coins in a museum and you will see them peppered with tiny test cuts. That is not damage. That is a security system. That is 1,000 nervous merchants, each one making sure he was not being cheated, one nick at a time. So where did all that silver come from? Follow it back and the answer is astonishing. The great rivers of what is now Russia, the Volga, the Dnieper, were highways, and the Norse traders who worked them, the Rus, plugged Scandinavia directly into the wealth of the Islamic world. Silver coins called dirhams, struck in the mints of the Abbasid Caliphate and then in enormous quantities by the Samanid dynasty out in Central Asia, flowed north up those rivers by the millions, real millions. They paid for furs and, again, for slaves, and they ended up buried in fields on Gotland and melted into arm rings in Sweden. The richest room in the Viking economy was not in Scandinavia at all. It was a mint in a desert 2,000 miles away, and the whole northern trade was, in a sense, a machine for pointing a fire hose of Central Asian silver at a supply of forest furs and captured people. Now here's the trick that made the trading post genuinely profitable, and it is the same trick that runs under the Silk Road and every long-distance trade in history: arbitrage. A squirrel pelt on the edge of the Arctic, taken in tribute from a Sami hunter, is worth almost nothing where it is caught. The same pelt in Hedeby is worth silver. The same pelt again, carried south into Francia or east to the Caliphate where no such animal lives and the winters demand fur, is worth considerably more silver. Nobody carried a single pelt that whole way. The goods moved in a relay, north to the trading post to the next merchant, hand to hand, each trader working the stretch of road or water he knew and taking his cut before passing the cargo on. By the time a northern fur warmed a wealthy man in Baghdad, a dozen hands had touched it, and a dozen small profits had been sliced out of the gap between what it cost up north and what it fetched down south. The trading post was where the northern end of that relay happened. It was the place where raw wilderness wealth first turned into silver. And the highest margin cargo, brutal as it is to say plainly, was the enslaved human being, because unlike a barrel of furs, a captive walked to market on their own legs. The cruelty of that is exactly what made it lucrative. By now, this is starting to look like a machine that prints silver, and for a couple of centuries in the right places, it very nearly was. So here is what broke it. And notice that not one of the things that broke it was a rival raider with a bigger axe. The first thing that could kill you is the thing you never controlled: the king's peace. Remember, you don't own the market. You rent your safety from whoever holds power. And power in the Viking world was not a stable thing. When a king died and the succession was contested, when a war rolled through, when a chieftain who guaranteed your market lost his grip, the peace of the market evaporated, and a trading post with no guaranteed peace is just a rich, undefended pile of goods sitting where everybody can see it. The market was only ever as safe as the politics above it, and the politics above it changed with every funeral. The second thing is the calendar. This was a seasonal business, ruthlessly so. The Baltic and the northern rivers freeze. Ships don't sail through pack ice, and a river route to the silver of the east closes solid for months. So the real trading window was the sailing season, and everything, the arrival of goods, the arrival of ships, the arrival of the silver itself, was crammed into it. A trader's whole year could turn on a few crowded weeks. Ice came late, or a storm season ran long, and the ships that were supposed to fill your jetty simply never came. The third thing is the one that got the whole system in the end, and it came out of that desert mint you'd never think to worry about. In the second half of the 10th century, the great river of Islamic silver began to fail. The Samanid mines and mints that had fed the north for generations faltered. The flow of good dirhams thinned and the quality slipped. Historians call it the silver crisis, and you can read it in the hordes. The coins get scarcer, then get replaced by silver from elsewhere. Then the whole weighed silver economy starts giving way to real minted coinage and a different kind of world. When your entire business is built on converting furs into a foreign silver supply, and that foreign silver supply dries up 2,000 miles away for reasons no northern chieftain could see coming or do anything about, you are in serious trouble, and you did not even do anything wrong. Now watch these forces actually take down the two most famous trading posts in the north, each in its own way. Birka, the great market on its island in the Swedish lake, simply stopped. Around the 970s, the coins go quiet, the graves trail off, and the town that Ansgar's biographer had described a century and a half earlier was finished. Several things pressed on it at once. The eastern silver was faltering, trade routes shifted, and there was a slower stranger killer working underneath the whole place. The land itself was rising. In that part of Scandinavia, the ground has been springing back up ever since the weight of the Ice Age glaciers came off it. A few millimeters a year, which does not sound like much until you remember that a trading post lives or dies by its harbor. Give it a century or two, and the water that once floated a laden ship up to the jetty is too shallow to matter. The customers moved. A new town, Sigtuna, took over the role. Birka was left to the archaeologists. Hedeby, down at the neck of Denmark, died louder. It had been one of the largest towns in northern Europe, a hinge between the North Sea and the Baltic, protected by an earthwork rampart you can still walk today. And in the middle of the 11th century, it was attacked, raided, and burned. The tradition points a finger at a Norwegian king and then at a Slavic raiding fleet. And while historians argue the details, the outcome is not in dispute. The great market of Hedeby ended in fire and was not rebuilt. Its trade simply crossed the water to a new town, Schleswig, and Hedeby became a grassy field with a rampart around it. The most important market of the southern Viking world, gone. Not outcompeted by a better market, but burned down and abandoned as the whole Viking age itself wound toward its close. So let's do the thing the sagas never do. Let's run the arithmetic. Let's price a good year and a bad year for a merchant working one of these posts. A good year looks like this. The ice breaks early. The eastern rivers open and the rust come down them with sacks of dirhams. The northern chieftains come south with a season's worth of furs and ivory and walrus rope and captives. The Frisian and Frankish traders come up from the other direction with wine and blades and glass. For a few glorious weeks, your fenced strip of mud on the waterfront is the busiest place in the world. You buy furs cheap from a northerner who has no other buyer this side of the mountains. You sell them dear to a southerner who has nowhere else to get them. And you keep the difference in weighed silver. You take your cut on the slaves. You lend a little on the side. And when the ships sail and the market empties for winter, you sit on a chest of hack silver worth more than most farmers will see in a lifetime. And you start converting it into the only things that actually last. Land, cattle, a fine haul, a marriage into a better family, and a reputation as a man of weight. That, precisely, is the point of the whole exercise. The silver was never the goal. The silver was how you turned a good trading season into permanent standing back home. A bad year does not need a battle to ruin you. A bad year is quieter than that. The ice stays late and half the ships miss the window. Or a war upriver closes the silver road and the dirhams simply don't come. And the furs you bought on the promise of a good market are now sitting in your workshop with no buyer and no silver to show for them. Or the king who guaranteed your peace is dead, the succession is a knife fight, and the market nobody is protecting is suddenly a very dangerous place to be standing with a chest of silver. Or the slow tide beneath your feet has lifted the harbor just enough that the biggest, richest ships now sail past you to a rival post with deeper water. Your costs, feeding your household, feeding your captives, the king's toll, the upkeep on your plot, those all carry on exactly as before. The revenue is what disappears. And that is how a trading fortune dies, not in one dramatic afternoon, but in a season where the ships you were counting on turn into empty water. So who actually got rich? Same answer as almost every trade in history, and it is never the person the legend celebrates. It was not the lone raider with the loudest reputation. Raiding was violent, seasonal, and wildly unreliable. A way to acquire the goods, not a way to build a fortune. The people who got rich were the ones who owned a position in the network and taxed everything that flowed past it. Look at Othere again, our talkative Norwegian. He told King Alfred he was wealthy, and where did the wealth come from? Not mainly from swinging a sword, from his herds, from the tribute he pulled out of the far north in furs and ivory and rope, and from carrying that raw wealth south to the markets and converting it. He was a middleman with a monopoly on a stretch of the world, and that is a far more durable thing to be than a warrior. And above men like Othere sat the real winners, the kings and great chieftains who owned the markets themselves. They did not have to sail anywhere or take any risk on any single cargo. They sold peace and collected tolls. Every fur, every coin, every captive that passed through Hedeby or Birka left a little silver behind for the man who guaranteed nobody would get stabbed while trading it. That is the best business in the whole story. No ships, no voyages, no exposure to a bad season, just a cut of everyone else's risk. It is exactly the same lesson that runs under the Silk Road caravan and the frontier saloon and the medieval bank. The person who owns the road always beats the person who travels it. And here is the final irony, the one that reframes the entire thing. Every single one of these trading posts is gone. Birka is an empty island. Hedeby is a field inside an old rampart. Kaupang faded. The kings who own them are dust, and half of them are barely even names. The merchants who worked the plots left nothing behind but post holes and the occasional dropped weight. But go back to that hoard on Gotland. 67 kilograms of silver, 14,000 coins from mints their owner never saw. That silver outlived every king, every merchant, and every market in this story. It is sitting in a museum right now, pecked and chopped and weighed 1,000 years ago by nervous men who wanted to be sure they weren't being cheated. The institutions died. The instrument survived. The Vikings are remembered for the raid, but the raid was never the business. The raid was just the supply line. The business was the market, the scale, and the patient, unglamorous, occasionally brutal work of turning wilderness and captured people into weighed silver, and weighed silver into land and standing and a name that would last. You were never really buying a trading post. You were buying a seat at the exact point where the violence of the North got laundered into the silver of the South. And the men who got rich understood that the axe made the headlines, but the balance made the money.